Welcome to Prepared for Parenthood, the podcast for hopeful, expectant, and new parents with little ones up to age 5. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Duger, a psychotherapist, author, educator, parent coach, and married mother of 2. On this show, we'll discuss everything from the most up-to-date practicals of best supporting your young children, to thriving in relationship as a family, to more surprising topics around the psychology and development of babies from conception through age 5. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'm thrilled to have you here today. Today our guest is Dr. Angel Hill, a naturopath who's passionate about women's health and has helped more than 7,000 people in 14 years in her clinical setting. She's now bringing her business fully online to help women from preconception to menopause. Dr. Hill is a certified doctor of natural medicine with certifications in perinatal issues. She's been married to Dennis for more than 20 years, has a college-age daughter, loves podcasts, and also loves watching 90210 reruns. Welcome back to Prepared for Parenthood. I'm so excited. Today we have Angel Hill here, who's going to share a little bit about how to prepare your body for pregnancy. Angel, welcome, and so happy you could be here to join us.
Thank you, Dr. Stephanie. I'm really excited to be here.
Could you share a little bit about how you help people prepare for pregnancy?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I have been a naturopath for about 14 years now. And in that time frame, I helped about 7,000 people. So I helped all kinds of different illnesses and symptoms and stuff. And what I discovered during that time frame is people would call me women and say, I got pregnant. And that wasn't even our example. So you start to realize there's patterns and things going on. And so that's kind of how I got all into this. But when I think about fertility, I think about it as being our natural health. Even if you're not trying to get pregnant, you want to have good fertility because that means that we have good health. And so when you're thinking about getting pregnant, you want to even pay more attention to that. And so I say that if you feel like you're completely healthy, we need at least 3 months to get you healthy for pregnancy because that's how long it takes the ovaries and sperms to get mature for us to do that. But if somebody has health problems or something like that, I say let's even look at 6 months to up to a year because we got to get those health problems fixed before we can jump in on the fertility aspect.
And what does that look like? So say a person were to come to you and they're like, I'm thinking about getting pregnant. I have some health issues. What do you actually do for them?
Absolutely. And by the way, since 50% of infertility is men as well, I can do this for men and women. But I start personally with hair tissue mineral analysis. It's actually what the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, uses to check for heavy metals in people. And what this does, not only does it tell your heavy metal status, which can definitely affect fertility, but it also can tell your mineral status. And these days, most of us are getting enough vitamins from our diet, but our minerals have just not there anymore. We have farmed them out of the soil. We're not eating food that has minerals in it anymore. And so if we can find what minerals need to be replaced, we can really skyrocket those hormones because basically minerals are what make the hormones work. So I start with that for sure. I find out what mineral status we're at, if we got any heavy metals going on, and then we kind of go from there. I actually, when it comes to fertility, I like people to track as well. So if they're tracking their ovulation, that's always helpful for something like natural cycles or whatever you have. But even before I do any mineral testing, I like to tell people to get off synthetic fragrances. I'm a lot of mission about this. Synthetic fragrances are endocrine disruptors. So they actually pretend to be our hormones and they replace receptor sites in our body. And so it's basically bad hormones trying to do things. And they cause all kinds of problems, including men's sperm count to go significantly down. So something really easy people could do right away is get rid of any synthetic fragrances. Those are perfumes, plug-ins in the wall, anything like that. And then also go to glass water bottles instead of plastics. We're finding that plastics have a lot of these hormone disruptors in them too. So if they could definitely work on just getting those 2 things out of their body while we're trying to figure out their minerals, it's a wonderful option.
Amazing. And I was just reading something this weekend, I think in the New York Times, about how they're finding smaller than microplastics in regular tap water that's presumed to be safe, and how using a home filter to filter your water the best you can, or, a stand-up filter like a Brita or something like that,
can really go a long way to pull some of those plastics out as well, which is, it's scary to think about how much we're ingesting things.
Absolutely.
Um,
Now, just recently, they found it in even baby food. So we're giving it to
mhm,
our babies. It's terrible. But
yeah.
talking about the minerals, kind of getting back to that, minerals actually, if our minerals are balanced correctly, it actually helps us get things out of our body that should be getting out, like heavy metals. And so
Mm.
I tell people, even if they can't find someone to do mineral testing on them or anything, just to take an electrolyte in the morning, that's the 4 foundational minerals of calcium, magnesium, sodium, and potassium. That helps at least get our minerals up to where they can be, since we're just so not getting them in our food.
Wow. Okay. And then for the perfumes, does that include like laundry detergent, hand
It was
soaps, cleaning?
it
Where do you
really
find all the
does.
fragrances?
Yes,
Yeah.
and 95% of things that have fragrance in them are synthetic fragrances, and they're made from things like petroleum. So I suggest if you're getting things that have essential oils in them, usually you're okay. So people that have essential oil diffusers, things like that, or use essential oils as perfumes. But unfortunately, the rest of them are really causing havoc on hormones. And there's like study after study coming out. They're nothing good.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the four, I can't remember what you said, the four
The 4
cornerstones
foundational
of
minerals.
foundation. So can you share what those are again?
Yes.
What are
So
some?
they're sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium. And I just kind of want to make a point about the sodium. We think of, oh, we don't want too much sodium. We always talk about sodium in our food. And typically, if we're eating sodium, if anything packaged, that is not the kind of sodium we want. I'm talking about good, clean salt that has minerals still in it. Almost all of the sodium that's in our packaged food, the minerals have been pulled out of that sodium. So it's not helpful for us at all. But what those minerals do is they spark plug our hormones. And we have something called a hormone hierarchy in our body. And basically, what that means is there's these hormones that if the bottom one isn't balanced, then the next one won't be balanced. So, for instance, one of the first hormones I start to work with people isn't their sex hormones, it's actually their adrenal glands, which is the cortisol hormone. And because that is the foundational hormone. If it's not working, nut insulin, thyroid, and sex hormones cannot function. So it's just, it's one of those basic hormones we have to have balance. And a lot of people don't know this, but the adrenals actually produce hormones. They produce testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. So even if we don't have our ovaries or anything, we're still getting those hormones for the adrenals. So they're the first stop shop of the hormones that we got to really get in order. And how people can know that they're having adrenal issues is if they're tired all the time or they're not sleeping at night. Now, obviously, there's more that we have to do with that, but I'm sure we're going to mention this later. But I actually have a 9-minute pod that talks about things that people can do for their adrenals. And interestingly, the adrenals have to be going first. As soon as we wake up in the morning, the adrenals have to be popping up. And they actually need sodium more than any other organ of the body. So when you're getting those electrolytes first thing in the morning, it's telling those adrenals, hey, we need energy. We need to get those hormones going for the day.
Okay. And so you mentioned high quality salt. What would somebody look for? Morton's? Himalayan pink salt? Like, what is the best kind of salt for people, do you think?
Absolutely. So my number one go-to is real salt. And I like real salt because it comes from Utah. It comes from this country. And so it's kind of actually easier for us to get now because I like Celtic salt and I like pink Himalayan salt as well. But they actually come from like Afghanistan and the Middle East. And it's a lot harder to get those right now. So,
Mm.
but any of them will do because none of them have been stripped. Morton salt usually has been stripped. You just have to check and see how they're doing it. But if there's any kind of chloride process or anything that's stripping the salt. And then in that next hormone that we're thinking about, insulin is actually the next hormone up. And people don't think about, oh, well, keeping my blood sugar levels is going to help me get pregnant. But it's striking if we can keep our blood sugar spikes down, we can keep the hormone spikes down. And every time our hormone spikes, it isn't helpful for us. And it affects mental health, as I'm sure you know.
Good. Yeah, for sure.
So
Yeah.
one of those things I say is just whenever we're taking those electrolytes, maybe after do that, get 15 to 30 grams of protein in your body so we can help set those blood sugar levels for the day.
And then I'm imagining because we're living in a very high stress world, your adrenals, for most people, I think, are working really hard. There's a lot of cortisol being pumped out. There's a lot of adrenaline being pumped out for people who maybe aren't aware of it. It's chronic stress that's happening for folks. So, do you have a thought around everyday stresses that we're provided with? Like, how do you navigate that? Because there's the physical part, right? And then there's, like you mentioned, the emotional, mental load that's happening where we're dealing with everyday stresses or maybe extreme stresses, like maybe things are hard at work or with family or something. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah. So besides, I mentioned the minerals and the protein in the morning. Those two really help the physical part of all that comes. But two other things I like. The first one is sunlight. I like us to get sunlight first thing in the morning because that tells our body it's time to wake up. It gets all our hormones up and it even helps our melatonin. Sleep is so important for us to recover. So if we're waking up and we haven't slept well at night, but getting that sunlight first thing in the morning tells all our receptors in our eyes, hey, it's time to awake and 12 hours from now, you're going to be going to sleep again. So it's just a
Mhm.
really good way to get that going. I also like water. I know everybody jokes about that or talks about water, but we are dehydrated when we sleep at night. So we've got to get some fluids in us first thing in the morning. It's amazing. I'll have people just do water, that protein, and get some sun in the mornings. And a week later, they report back to me. They have more energy. They get up and clean their house without thinking about it. It's just really simple things. I'm a big fan of breath work. So when we
Okay.
take deep breaths, it actually tells our cortisol not to spike. So if you're
Hmm.
feeling the stress, if you're feeling that anxiety, if you can just try to remember to take 3 deep breaths, it immediately cuts off that cortisol spike. And it's so helpful.
And is there a certain way to do that breath? Like, I imagine maybe it needs to go into your belly.
Yes. And so there's a lot of different methods out there. I'm one if you just breathe any way you can, but I do like to have your belly come out. So you've got the breath in your belly and you're breathing through your nose, out through your mouth kind of thing. And I tell people just do it 3 times. I'll run into the bathroom if I'm somewhere I can't do it in front of people. Just
Mhm.
anytime you can think just to get that. It's amazing how much it cuts off that cortisol spike.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned sunlight and dehydration. So I live in Boulder, Colorado, and we get a lot of sun, and it's also incredibly dry. And I grew up back east in a more humid environment, and I'm constantly drinking water. My kids are constantly drinking water. It's the running joke. You always walk everywhere with your metal water bottle and just drink constantly. And so I'm thinking about all of the people who live in drier climates or at altitude and how quickly you get dehydrated. So, do you think it's important for people, say, in a drier climate like where I live, to have more electrolyte drinks? Is that more helpful to stay more hydrated or?
Actually, it depends on how your personal physiology is, but there is something. I'm glad you mentioned that, and it's basically if you're a fast oxidizer or a slow oxidizer. And basically, what that means, people who are a fast oxidizer, I'm one of those. You tend to be more stressed, and you go
Mhm.
through your minerals extremely quickly. And so, I actually have to do minerals twice a day. I do a morning and night because I'm just going through them so quickly. But the good thing about being a fast oxidizer is I go through heavy metals really quickly too. They don't tend to hang out in those. But then
Mhm.
there are some people who are slow oxidizers. They have symptoms as well, but they tend to not be as anxious. But the heavy metals hang out in their body. So that can be an issue that is keeping them from getting pregnant, for instance. So
Yeah.
different people, but the hydration definitely, you need more hydration living in a drier climate. I'm in a humid climate and I need a lot of hydration.
And is there a certain electrolyte mix or drink that you recommend for people? Like, is it just Gatorade or what's the best thing for people to get the best high quality
I'm so
stuff
glad
in
you
them?
asked that. So, two things I really look at is no sugar and no added coloring. Added coloring actually has petroleum in it as well. So, we don't want to
Mm.
get that into our system. I have a list. If somebody wants to find me, you can DM me on all the socials and I can send you a list. But the number one that seems to be coming out with my people in my program is called Ultima, Ultima. I know it can be got at most grocery stores and also online. But everybody likes the taste of it and they say they really notice a difference with it.
That's great. Great to know it's out there, easy to get your hands on.
And
Mm.
then next on
And
that, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
go ahead. No, please
Oh,
go
I was just
ahead.
going to say next on that hormone hierarchy is the thyroid. And that is the number one reason why people can't get pregnant. And not only for women, but for men too. So I like people going into this to get a complete thyroid check. And that is a little different than what you normally get when you go to the doctor. Normally, they'll give you like a TSH and maybe a T4 or something. They don't really do much, but there's actually 7 components of the thyroid they need to check. And so make sure you find a good functional doctor that can either order that for you or just get a hold of somebody like me, a functional doctor like me that can actually give you the list to give to your doctor to make sure both men and women get that thyroid baseline checked. A lot of times, too, when conventional doctors are looking at that thyroid, they're looking for disease. Whereas functional doctors like me, we're looking more for how can we optimize your health. So you may want somebody different to actually look at the reference ranges too, because they may say, well, you're not in disease, so we're not worried about it. But you could be in a reference range of not being able to be pregnant because your T3 isn't working.
Okay, super helpful. Yeah. And so you'd really have to kind of go outside of the standard medical system to know what to ask for. And then what was the fourth one? I think that was the third.
Oh, yes. So the fourth one in the hormone hierarchy is lastly the sex hormones, which, you would think it would be the opposite way. And if somebody is familiar with seed cycling, if they're not, I can certainly teach them more about it. They can look at my socials. I talk about it all the time, but that's something really non-invasive I like to get women on. And basically what you're doing is the first half of your cycle, you're doing pumpkin and flax seeds to support your estrogen. And the second half of the cycle, you do sunflower and sesame seeds to support your progesterone. And there's all kinds of recipes around this you can do. I'm actually putting together a program for it where it's going to show people just how to take care of the progesterone and estrogen. And it's a really subtle way to do it. But most people I've worked with, most women, they have told me by the second cycle, they notice differences of doing it. So it's something really easy. And I can get people information on that as well. And there's something that kind of goes right along with that is cycle syncing. And this is really helpful for mental health. And it's basically looking at those 4 cycles of the menstrual cycle, which are menstrual, follicular, ovulatory, and luteal. And each of those portions of the cycle need different things. So for instance, like the follicular cycle, it's prepping you for pregnancy. So you want to make sure you're eating really light, clean foods during that time, but you also can do like really high intensity workouts and you're really productive during that time. But if you try to do those things during your menstrual cycle, that might not go well. And so a lot of people have found by putting different things with different times in their cycle, that really helps their mental health because they know during this time frame, I'm just really not going to be able to do something because my mental health isn't there. So that's another thing I work with my customers. That tends to be more women I work with that, obviously.
How do you, so I bring this up a lot. I live in a place that has a lot of high intensity athletes living here, people who are running ultra marathons and they're doing Ironman and they're doing all this stuff. So how do you work with those individuals?
So we'll work more on the food end, maybe, since they can't do it on the exercise end. Work with maybe taking a little bit more breaks, but still getting it in. So yeah, definitely. And what's nice about these time frames is they're only 3 to 5 days. So a lot of times you can work in a lot of rest times during that quarter time, and then you can really get productive. I'm not real prescriptive, and I say you have to eat a certain diet, you have to do certain exercises. I give these kind of things are good for you. Let's pick out what's good for you right now for your body type and what you're doing in your life. Does that make sense?
And then once someone has a baby, how do you help them maybe recover from that experience? Because it's pretty intense and it takes a lot out of your body. And then often people are nursing the baby and you're maybe not sleeping well and things like that. Do you follow them kind of through the pregnancy, and do they return to you after they're done? What does that look
I
like?
have one lady who's doing that right now with me. Some people come right after they've had a baby. I kind of focus on 3 different things after pregnancy, though. Mineral repletion, getting all those minerals back in because babies steal all our minerals. And I unfortunately didn't know all of this 20 years ago when I had my child. And I actually lost 40 pounds with her while I was pregnant. I was just sick. And so I was depleted for years and didn't even realize it. And so finally I got all that back. And I'm so glad I learned about all that stuff. So I definitely use TMA with my new moms. Let's find out first off what's depleted. But then I really focus on blood pressure and thyroid. And the reason is those 2 tend to really get messed up during pregnancy. And so we don't want any new symptoms coming up. So I really try to work on helping them balance it through things like diet, because they usually are nursing. So I don't want to give supplements. So for instance, for the thyroid, I'll have them eat a Brazil nut a day because that's good for selenium. And selenium is one of the major things our thyroid needs. And then working on the basics like the water and the electrolytes and getting sun, and with a baby, because it's obviously good for the baby to get sun as well too. And I actually am in a community right now where the health professionals are working on having women wear, as soon as they have a baby, they get a little bracelet, and they have that for up to a year so that if they're in an emergency situation, the emergency workers know there's going to be certain situations that may be happening with pregnant women. 2 others that I don't deal with as specifically that tend to happen, the thyroid and the blood pressure are the 2 biggest that the National Institutes of Health have found. And then the other 2 are sepsis, which is like infections, and stroke. And I can help with things like prevention of stroke, but it's still one of those that medical doctors usually have to get involved with on those.
And do you see that more frequently in women who've had surgery, like a C-section? Like I think of people with sepsis and things like that. There's been a lot of intervention in those births often, and with stroke and things like that.
Those 2, the sepsis and stroke, tend to be more with C-sections, but the thyroid and the blood pressure, we'll see with any And even gestational diabetes will sometimes turn into diabetes. So I work with a lot of women on that, trying to get their sugar levels back after they have the babies.
And what tends to happen with blood pressure? Does it tend to be higher or lower than normal?
Higher. So women will get that, preeclampsia while they're pregnant, and it just continues on after the pregnancy. And a lot of times, at least in the area I live with in Northwest Florida, a lot of women aren't going back to the doctor as regularly. So they're so busy, they have other kids and things. And so they're not getting blood pressure checks. They don't even know what's happening.
And is there any way to tell? I always heard of challenges with blood pressure being kind of like the silent killer, right?
Mhm.
Is there any way to tell that your blood pressure is not where it should be if you're not
Yeah.
having it checked?
The two things I immediately ask people if I think there's any blood pressure issues are if they're feeling faint, they start feeling faint and they've eaten, migraines as well, like headaches, migraines, things like that. That's actually a telltale time that there's definitely stroke, and high blood pressure headaches are a kind of early sign on, particularly with women who postpartum women.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Angel. I just learned so much. And I wish I'd met you 17 years ago before I had my first. But can you share just how people can get in touch with you if they want to learn more? There's so much more that I know you have to share, and a little bit more about the 9-minute pod that you mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. So you can go to alternativehealthwithangel.com and just click on there. And that's where you can get my 9-minute pod. And that is got no supplements. It's all lifestyle and dietary things that you can do to help get more energy. And I've had people tell me that in about a week, they start really noticing a difference with that. So you can find me on alternativehealthwithangel.com. And you can also find me at Alt Health Angel at Instagram and Facebook, and I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Thank you so much, Angel. So
Thank
great to have you
you.
here. And I know I will want to invite you back at some point in the future for more great information.
That sounds great.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Prepared for Parenthood podcast today. I hope you found this episode educational, informational, and conversational, and that you'll join me again for another episode soon. If you enjoyed listening to today's podcast, I'd very much appreciate if you would rate, review, and subscribe. If you're interested in more information related to today's podcast, or are looking for parent coaching or courses, you can find my information in the show notes or online at preparedforparenthood.com.